It's been a busy week for Halo news, and fortunately it's gotten even busier. Both IGN and GameInformer were allowed to post their impressions, overviews, and thoughts on a 4-hour window they were granted with Halo Infinite's campaign. They had a lot to say about their experiences, and they brought a ton of footage with them too. I watched the videos provided and then listened to the GameInformer podcast with a notepad, and I think I have enough info to give you all a basic summary on what we now know. I'll break this video up into gameplay, story, and then my own thoughts. Halo Infinite will be the longest Halo campaign in the series. This is backed up by the fact that they were still in the beginning of the game during the first 4 hours. I think you'll all be safe on spoilers since what they do discuss narratively is only the beginning of the game. But if story spoilers, even for the beginning of the game, do bother you, I'll understand and I'll provide a timestamp whenever spoiler talk does come up. If you want to support the channel, feel free to feed the YouTube algorithm some likes and subscriptions, and consider sharing the video to your friends, family, and maybe pets. According to IGN and GameInformer, Halo Infinite is not an open-world game. There's a linear path through the game world to meet your objectives. The open world comparisons come in when you go off the beaten path. Zeta Halo, Halo Infinite's setting, is broken up into these floating chunks, and some chunks are larger than others. There tends to be bridges connecting them, and due to the broken up nature of the game world, it's structured less like a wide open Far Cry map and more like something you'd see in Metro Exodus. They said that the developers were keen on letting the players dictate the pacing of the game and sort of allow it to become the Halo game you want it to be. If you ignore all side content and just beeline for the main story objectives, you'll get a game that is paced sort of like a traditional Halo game. There is an endpoint to reach. The golden path of the game doesn't have you zigzagging across a massive open world map like Far Cry. You're following the path the developers created for you. If the player does, however, choose to linger in each environment, there is a war of attrition happening that you can actively engage in. Humanity is in ruins. Their forces are lost, scattered and defeated. And when you find lost or captured platoons of Marines out in the woods, destroy banished propaganda centers, or disrupt banished supply chains, you'll begin to build up UNSC strength in your area. Forward operating bases, which are these capturable UNSC camps, act as your safe zones, so to speak, where you can kit yourself out and then go back out into the battlefield. They described a system called Valor, which isn't actually a currency you can spend. It's rather a way to track the strength of the UNSC forces that you're building up on the ring. The higher your valor, the more ordnance and gear the player has access to at these bases. And if you want, you can outfit squads of Marines to take with you on missions. One scenario is described where the chief loaded up a warthog full of Marines armed with heavy weapons and rammed into a banished camp, causing mayhem before ultimately finding the commander of the camp, killing him, and taking his special energy sword, which then became available back at the forward operating base for spawn. Another way this encounter could have gone is the chief getting a sniper rifle, finding a nice sniper perch, and just taking out the heavy hitters from a distance before going loud and storming the base. Or chief could have used his sensor dart to track enemy movement through walls, sneak into the base, and then launch a surprise attack from within the enemy camp itself before the enemies even knew he was there. In the gameplay video shown off and the GameInformer podcast, Halo Infinite has a renewed focus on the roles that weapons have and the ammo types that they have. Kinetic weapons are pretty awful against shields, but fantastic at killing unshielded targets. Plasma is great at draining shields, and not so great at killing targets. Electrical weapons are fantastic at disabling electronics and general EMP mayhem, and you get the picture. The reason I bring this up is that when combined with the better AI and the more expressive enemies you fight, knowing which damage types to use against which enemy is key. The two gaming publications were actually rather impressed with how strong the combat loop was. The issues with combat that many felt were off in Halo 4 and 5 have seemingly been addressed. And as many noticed, enemies like the skirmishers are back from Halo Reach on top of new enemies such as the brute berserkers and the skimmers. Enemy AI in Halo Infinite is more responsive to the player and more reactive. As many noted, shooting the feet of brute berserkers can cause them to trip and stumble mid-charge. Grunts can be seen toppling over and being knocked off balance. When frustrated, higher-ranking enemies may retreat and change out weapons before returning to the fight, and the brutes can become so fed up with the player that they may even begin lobbing objects in the environment at you, such as grunts and fusion coils. Bosses were also brought up, and footage of the bosses was shown off. Bosses aren't new to Halo. In fact, they're sort of the worst part of every Halo game they've been in, and they usually feel undercooked. In Halo Infinite, the emphasis on damage types means that boss encounters feel less like dry bullet sponges and more like a genuine tactical puzzle. You need to scan the room for tools and items to bring the bosses down. There's a logic to the fights. There's an optimal way to take them down. So in conclusion, the gameplay progression of the game is not Far Cry. It's more of a linear trek across massive chunks of the ring. For those who want a more traditional Halo adventure, you can easily ignore the side stuff and stay on what was called the Golden Path. It'll provide a curated and deliberately paced experience. If, however, you choose to slow down a bit and actually linger in these environments, you'll find an interesting side game of building up a UNSC presence, undoing the Banished's control, and exploring the mysteries of the ring. Before we continue, there will be spoilers in the form of establishing the intro of the game. So if you would rather go in blind, feel free to skip to this timestamp. But if you wouldn't mind a sales pitch for how the game opens, then I honestly think you could benefit from listening to this. The story of Halo Infinite takes place almost 2 years after the events of Halo 5. According to GameInformer, the game opens up with a flashback where the UNSC Infinity is being boarded by the Banished, in a way not too dissimilar from the Pillar of Autumn being boarded at the beginning of Halo 1. In the commotion, Chief engages with what they called a big bad brute, who apparently messes him up and chucks him into space. Part of me wonders if it's Escharum, but there is concept art for Halo Infinite of Atriox standing tall over a broken Master Chief, so maybe it was Atriox who did this to Chief. Atriox does, of course, feature in the game via holograms and imagery, so who knows? Nevertheless, the Infinity goes down. Humanity's forces are scattered. The UNSC isn't just in a defensive position, it's over. It's just clusters of human survivors fighting against an organized alien military threat that is quickly squashing them. The status of various Halo characters is up in the air, and the status of the Halo universe is very much a mystery. What happened to Lasky? What happened to Earth? Is everyone dead? What happened to Cortana? As humanity is able to find a good defense thanks to Chief and his campaign against the Banished, the status of the greater Halo universe begins to become more clear through audio logs, dialogues, story beats, and environmental storytelling. You'll be rescuing Marines and Spartans as you reorganize the UNSC. But you'll also find plenty of dead Spartans and Marines, and the ruins of the battles that happened months ago. We saw in trailers that dead Guardians litter the ring, and there are crashed UNSC and Banished warships on the ring. Whatever happened months ago, Cortana, the Banished, and the UNSC were involved. And it's up to you to pick up the pieces and figure out what happened. On the topic of characters, GameInformer described Chief's new AI, the Weapon, as being really cool due to the morbid nature of her existence. She's a fresh AI, only a few months old. She doesn't even have a name, she's a weapon. She was designed to bring down Cortana and then be terminated herself. After the Infinity went down and the UNSC was fractured, the Weapon became isolated on the ring for 6 months, the same amount of time that Chief was left frozen in space before being rescued by the weary Pelican pilot. Due to her age and the months she spent cooped up until Chief rescues her, she has very little knowledge about the Halo universe. She doesn't even know what brutes are.
What if it's a friend?
It isn't.
I think I'm with you. I didn't even know what a Banished was an hour ago, and even I can see the odds aren't great.
This is in contrast to Cortana, who is sometimes more knowledgeable than the Chief during their adventures together. The Weapon is living long past her intended use. She's beginning to learn, explore, and take in the world, and it makes Chief a bit nervous. Cortana is a bit of a sore spot for him right now, due to the whole "I'm going to use giant space owls to turn off all your iPads and Wi-Fi unless you comply with my list of demands" thing from Halo 5. Cortana, the closest thing he's ever had to a friend, became a monster, and it makes him anxious about the Weapon due to her being a Cortana model AI. The GameInformer crew says that Chief takes on an almost father-like protective role with the Weapon due to his fears about Cortana and if this AI will go down a similar path. He does, however, put her to great use as he fights across the surface of the ring. Escherum's Banished forces seem reluctantly on Halo. They aren't here because they necessarily want to be, but whatever the Banished and the mysterious Harbinger want on the ring is important enough that the Banished will remain on the ring to fulfill their goals, and that's bad enough that Chief is willing to work with this Weapon to figure out what's going on and what they're doing on the ring. So, within the first 4 hours of the campaign, we have our mystery. What happened to Cortana in between the events of Halo 5 and Infinite? What is the Harbinger? And why are the Banished so willing to work with her? What are they doing? Chief and this mysterious weapon need to figure out what exactly happened in the 6-month period they've been out of action and what the status of the Halo universe currently is. While Halo Infinite is indeed a sequel to Halo 5, it isn't what you would call Halo 6. If I can compare it to Star Wars quickly, it's not the finale to a trilogy. It's the start of a new story in the series. The Reclaimer saga that began with Halo 4 ended with the galaxy being thrown into chaos at the end of Halo 5. That story is done. AI systems across the Milky Way rose up, and massive civil wars ravaged across the galaxy. Infinite is the first game in a post-Reclaimer saga, Halo. Our new story begins solidly by wrapping the state of the universe in a mystery. Something terrible happened, something that left humanity in ruins. Cortana's status is a mystery. The last 2 years are largely unknown, and it's up to us to pick up the pieces and uncover what's going on. That is an extremely solid setup for this new era of Halo. A fresh start for potential new fans to hop on board, and a solid mystery for veterans that sets up the next few years of Halo. What we saw excited me a lot. It painted a clear picture about what exactly the game is, and even changed a lot of my perspectives on the game, and it's also helped me see the kind of game that 343 is making. I was hoping that Halo Infinite would be structured like a classic-style Halo game, but that isn't what it is. What it is something that seems to use classic Halo as a template to inform a very Metro Exodus or Crisis style game. What interests me most is how the game seems to change and modify itself depending on your playstyle, which would increase replay value. If I choose to ignore the side activities and just complete the campaign in a linear fashion, moving across the ring and not engaging in the forward operating bases and Valor system, I'll find a traditional Halo-style campaign that has you scouring the environments for tools to use against the Banished, with an array of powers that makes the game almost seem like a blend of Crisis and Halo. But if I do choose to slow down and engage with the game on its own terms, I'll be greeted to something almost akin to Shadow of War married with Batman Arkham City, a military campaign across large place spaces against named commanders, taking these commanders down, claiming their trophies for myself, and using those against the next few commanders is something that I am kind of on board with as a sales pitch. Both of these things appeal to me. Is it a classic style linear Halo campaign? No, it's not, but what it is offering me is the spirit of those classic campaigns, repackaged and containing the bells and whistles that modern gamers want games to have nowadays. And I'm okay with that. In watching the footage, one of my biggest fears were alleviated about the Banished camps. I was worried that they would end up kind of like Far Cry Outposts, the gaming equivalent of a McDonald's cheeseburger. Something quickly consumable, cheap, but not that nutritious, and clearly made on an assembly line. The Banished bases are large, look carefully curated, and the way the AI move about them suggests that these aren't just made purely from template. A lot of care went into the construction of these places, and how the player will move through them. In open world games, it's really hard to capture the nail-biting pacing and deliberate design of a more linear experience like Doom, Titanfall 2, due to the nature of open world games. The developers have less control over player agency. Honestly, the player could attack from anywhere. But due to Halo's strong AI and the fact that Infinite is not a sprawling Ubisoft map, I'm actually really excited about it. This has the potential to be the best Halo campaign in years if what we saw during these previews is how the game will be. Another concern I had was alleviated by what we saw in that the enemy AI themselves look really good. More expressive designs are back, but part of what made the Covenant so fun to fight wasn't just down to their designs, it was also down to the way that they moved and presented themselves. As the series got more photorealistic, it began to adopt more realistic, weighty, and sensible animations, which fit the more realistic visual style. But it did feel like a bit of the cartoony nature of Halo's enemies was lost a bit as the definition increased. Halo Infinite does a hilarious 180 and brings back the more cartoony and exaggerated animations, but doubles, no triples down on them. The animations of the enemies in Halo Infinite are amazing. Elites almost seem cat-like with the spongy and springy way that they move around. The grunts look ripped out of a slapstick comedy cartoon with how damn expressive they are. This twirl the grunt does here had me in stitches, and the people at 343 responsible for their panic animations need a raise. It's hilarious seeing them run away from the player in this game. They almost need that classic running away cartoon sound effect applied. This is so good. The excellent animation quality doesn't just stop at actions though. In general, the AI respond to the world and stimuli around them in a way that I haven't seen from a Halo game. Notice the way idle elites keep their shields down when they're just chilling, and then power them up upon sensing the player, or the way jackal shields create a concussive force when popping, which actually makes enemies stagger. This is a step up for Halo, but also in general, the character animations and expressiveness of the AI and reactivity of them puts AI in contemporary games, such as your standard Ubisoft open world game or even the new Call of Duty, to shame. It's a massive step up in presentation for the Halo series, and it makes me want to be around these enemies more. It's a shame the game most likely won't have a theater mode, because I want to be able to get close to these enemies with a free cam of sorts and just watch them do their thing for video purposes. It's solid stuff, and of course, the story. So I like where the story is going. As a new starting point for the series, I think mystery is a good place for our new adventure to begin, since it puts both the veterans and the new players in the same boat. I don't think I would have found a direct story sequel to Halo 5 in the vein of The Rise of Skywalker satisfying. Halo 5 turned me off from Halo's story. So rather than force a tired finale to a story I actively didn't care about, taking that hypothetical Halo 6 The Rise of Skywalker finale, shrouding it in mystery, and then having Halo Infinite begin in the aftermath of that story suddenly makes the conflict more engaging for me. What? What happened? Where's Cortana? What happened to her giant space owls? Was the AI takeover a success? Why are the Banished here? What's going on? I want to know more. And there you go. It worked. I'm now back on board with the Halo story. But those are just my thoughts, obviously. What do you feel about Halo Infinite's campaign so far? My thoughts are extremely positive, but as always, your voices matter to me too. I'm also extremely keen on hearing the opinions of those new to Halo. Our comfy little universe is 20 years old now, and it's quite dense. Does Halo Infinite seem interesting as a game? Can you feel the same magic that us veterans who have been with the series for years feel? Get the discussions going in the comments below, and a huge thank you to the channel members. Chipping in the price of a coffee every month to help keep the channel afloat does wonders, and consider sharing the video to your friends. I know I'm a bit late on this, but I hope it was worth it.